What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Jake Madison from Locked On Pelicans. The Pelicans extend a 2-year extension to CJ McCollum. What does this extension say about CJ McCollum's role in New Orleans and how the Pelicans front office views him? Plus, how do the Pelicans incorporate Zion Williamson into a team that had so much success last season? We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting and info this season. Find out the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every single sport out there. That's right, they've got you covered for MLB postseason. NBA is right around the corner. They've got you for all your fighting odds, UFC, MMA, boxing, you name it. They've got you covered over at BetOnline. Right now, you can run over to BetOnline to take a look at who the odds-on favorites are for the NBA championship this season. Right now, the Golden State Warriors now leading the pack at plus 575 after all the drama with the Boston Celtics, who are still in second place at plus 600. You got the Milwaukee Bucks in third at plus 700, and then rounding out the top five favorites, you got the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Clippers at plus 750 apiece. So for all of that and more odds, head over to BetOnline to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Jake Madison from Locked On Pelicans and Locked On NBA, who you can follow on Twitter at Nola Jake. Now, Jake, the Pels extending CJ McCollum a 2-year, $64 million extension, carrying him through the 2025-2026 season. Now, his contract lines up with the long-term contracts of both Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. What does this extension say about CJ McCollum's role in New Orleans and how the Pels front office views him?
Yeah, I think when they traded for him at the trade deadline last year, they kind of viewed him as the missing piece, guy they really had to bring in. One, from just his on-court performance perspective, right? This is an excellent three-point shooter and a guy that can create his own three-point shot. They didn't really have another guy that could stretch the defense like that at all during Zion's tenure. Apologies there to JJ Redick a little bit. So to bring in just kind of a pure shooter like that, a guy they thought had some untapped potential as maybe a primary ball handler, was something they really thought would fit in well next to Brandon Ingram and then Zion whenever he would return, which is going to be this coming season. And then I think they also like his veteran presence in the locker room. This is still a really young team. They're going to have, second and third year guys playing significant roles as they push for the postseason this coming year. I think they like having a guy like CJ McCollum in the locker room, able to kind of settle people down, kind of be that consummate professional and hopefully teach them. And don't forget, this is the guy who at the NBA All-Star game kind of called out Zion Williamson, talking about how he hadn't reached out to CJ yet after the trade. And that kind of seemed to wake Zion up. It got him back to New Orleans sooner than we were expecting. You can't really put a price on a guy like that who's getting your best player to kind of be the best version of himself. So when you kind of factored those two things in, New Orleans always looked at CJ McCollum as like a cornerstone piece.
You talk about one of the most interesting facets of this acquisition from when it happened to how it played out with the play-in push, with the playoff berth, all of that, is CJ McCollum as a ball handler, right? Like, I don't think that was something that I expected out of this trade. I don't think it's something that a lot of people expected, but he really kind of flourished in this almost primary facilitator role in New Orleans.
Yeah, he did. And I think that's what worked really well, right? Like in the 20 or so games he played here in New Orleans, he basically set career highs across the board. This was a guy I think they looked at and said, okay, he's been playing next to Dame his whole career. What if we put him in a different situation, a different scenario, and what might we see from him then? I don't think he's a pure ball handler. You definitely don't want him playing point guard all of the time, but in spurts here or there, sharing the rock with a guy like Brandon Ingram, who did set a career high in assists last season, or Zion, and we saw the point Zion experiment a couple of years ago where he was averaging over 4 assists per game. I think they kind of look at him as a half ball handler or so. And when you put all these other half ball handlers that they have on the roster together, well, you're over one, so you kind of have a point guard just kind of chopped up in a sense, I think. And that's kind of what they viewed him, that they could put him in a role like this and he would absolutely thrive. And again, he averaged almost 25 points per game last season with New Orleans. He shot the three-pointer exceptionally well. That's what you need out of a guy like that for this team.
It's kind of like you have a point guard, but it's like Voltron, right? You have to stick all these pieces together to make it happen. The tricky part here, though, right, if you're New Orleans, is how do you now introduce Zion into the fold after all the success this team had last season? What needs to be the approach with Zion and kind of integrating him this year?
Look, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, right? They did make the postseason. They took the Phoenix Suns to 6 games, but a couple of those were without Devin Booker there, and they were still sub 500 last year. I think we're a little bit blinded by the fact that, they gave the Suns a run for their money when we saw the Suns weren't maybe as good as we thought at one point. So I don't think it's like, oh no, you're going to mess up the team chemistry or something like that by getting a guy like Zion freaking Williamson back out there on the court, right? Let's pump the brakes there to a degree. Zion has a certain court gravity to him. His sophomore year, he averaged 27 points per game, something along those lines, and was dishing out the ball, shot 70% at the rim. Anyone's going to be able to fit around there with him. If there's going to be periods of time where CJ just might be a spot-up three-point shooter, and he's going to get some of the most open looks he's ever had in his career, it's a good situation if you're him to be in. And I think when you look at a guy like CJ, Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram, they're going to stagger those guys. So there will be times when it's CJ McCollum kind of running the offense and out there maybe with some subs, or it might be CJ and Zion, or it might be CJ and Brandon Ingram. And his game, being that kind of on-ball shooter that he is, off-ball shooter as well, lends itself to kind of anybody. If it's Zion driving to the basket and having to kick out to CJ, it's a great thing. If it's CJ with the ball in his hands trying to create for a pull-up three-point shot to space the court eventually for Zion, that works too. And Brandon Ingram fits into that wonderfully as well. So I don't think, I think it's still going to see a lot of kind of point guard duties shared amongst the 3 of those guys, and it won't be anyone's full-time role. But I think they all complement each other well enough that this is going to be pretty easy. And when you start to really think about it, I get excited about what this Pelicans offense really could be, because I don't know how some teams are going to stop some of the combinations and lineups they're going to have out there on the court.
You mentioned some of the numbers, right, from the last time Zion was healthy. Have people almost kind of forgotten just how good Zion is when he's actually on the floor?
Do I have to call out BetOnline and the Locked On Network here for our top 50 guys who move the betting lines the most, and Zion wasn't listed on that? I don't know, man. A guy who can put up 27-7 and like 4.5 assists on 70% shooting, 65% shooting seems pretty good to me. But I think people really have forgotten about him a little bit, and that's going to be the case with sitting out a season. But he's under contract now. He signed the extension with no player option. It removes that little bit of drama from there. He's been working with a personal chef and a personal trainer, and the reviews from everyone I've spoken to around him, they rave about him. They say he's in the best shape of his life, not just, his young career, but his life beyond even Duke Zion. If he was putting up the numbers he put up at age 20 and he wasn't in the best shape of his life, I wonder what he's going to be able to do this season. So I'm really excited about it. And look, if people are forgetting about him, I think in the first couple weeks of the season, they're going to be very much reminded exactly who he is.
Yeah, we could be in store for a monster season from Zion. But you mentioned there a moment ago, Jake, kind of, maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here about, reintroducing Zion to this lineup, what it means for the Pelicans. Where is the bar currently set in your mind as far as expectations for the Pelicans this season after their successful play-in run and securing a playoff berth and, taking the Suns to 6 games last year? Where do you set the bar for what a successful season is for the Pels?
Yeah, it's tough. It's actually really tough to try and figure out. You figure they were a play-in tournament team last year. They won the 2 games to get into the postseason. They held their own against the Phoenix Suns. So if you kind of go on like the natural progression, right, you should say they're not a play-in tournament team, so it's 6 seed or better. But then you look at the Western Conference and who are they necessarily ahead of? Who's gotten worse? And that's where things in the West start to get muddled pretty quickly. You conceivably have 10 teams out there, I think, that could easily make a case for those 8 spots that, you have in the actual postseason. That's a problem for New Orleans. So I want to say 6 seed or better. I think if things click really well and the offense is as scary as I think it could be, they have a chance, if health goes their way, to maybe be the 4 seed. Might be kind of the ceiling for this squad, but it's also going to depend so much on some of these other teams in the West and who gets hit with an injury at an inopportune time. So because of that, it could be the play-in tournament too, but it's like that's the bare minimum, I think, but it feels like it should be higher than that given what we saw from them last season.
Now, we talked a little bit about kind of this team point guarding by committee, if you will. They drafted a point guard, Dyson Daniels, 8th overall in this last NBA draft. what is Dyson Daniels' role, if any? Does he even have one on the Pels roster this season, or is he kind of somebody that you maybe expect to be brought along a bit more slowly?
He's a bit of a mystery right now, I think. He only played in one game in Summer League, leaving that early with injury, so we didn't really get to see much of him there. The team's been working out together in parts throughout this offseason. I've heard really good things from Dyson Daniels, that he's more NBA ready than what we've been expecting from him, where originally I thought maybe he isn't in the rotation. It's tough to really find a spot for where he's going to be. I think the backcourt's kind of set with a guy like Jose Alvarado getting some of those minutes, CJ McCollum too. You might even have Brandon Ingram playing the 2 a little bit in this lineup. If you think the starting lineup's going to be CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and Jonas Valanciunas. So the backcourt's a little bit crowded. I don't know if he fits there just yet. It's really going to depend on his passing. Where he might get on the court is kind of as that like wing creator type of role that you see a lot of teams run, that the Pelicans do with Brandon Ingram a little bit too. He's got good size, right? This is a guy who's 6'8", 6'9". It's not like he's a 6'3" point guard and you can only play him at that position. I wouldn't be shocked because they like his defensive versatility. He's got high upside on the defensive side of the ball. That's kind of the big question mark around this Pelicans team. If he can play some defense, he'll find the court, and I wonder if it's going to be more at the wing to start the year than it will be kind of as a true point guard, and they kind of throw him out there to pass the ball around a little bit, but more defend than anything else.
How good can this Pelicans team be after their success last season, reintroducing Zion into the mix? Is Zion poised to have a monster season? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Pelicans. Jake, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Of course, thanks for having me on, Jackson.